Dr. Carlos Bertha from the U.S. Air Force Academy, Department of Philosophy. And he is going to be talking about Fideism, which I mispronounced earlier. So. And Carlos, come on.
All right, thank you. All right. Hey! It's really a pleasure to be here. Thank you very much for inviting me. This is great. Well, yeah, Fideism. A lot of people were asking me at the beginning, what is Fideism? What are you talking about? And yeah, perhaps I should have thought about a better title to get people more involved or more, know what I'm talking about. All right, so I'm going to start by defining what Fideism is. All right, so the general idea behind Fideism is that faith is required for warranting a belief. All right, that there's a role of faith in warranting a belief. Probably originated with the idea that Hume was talking about miracles, that in order for you to be able to accept miracles, you can't do it by evidence. So you have to have something else to be able to believe in miracles. All right, so namely faith. Now, there's a spectrum of Fideism. There's an extreme version of Fideism. People like Søren Kierkegaard would be described as a Fideist philosopher. They would say that only faith provides the warrants for belief. All right, so that's like I said, quite the extreme version of it. Moderate Fideism would be somebody like, say, Blaise Pascal. He would say, no, your reason and evidence and so on, there's reasons, there's good function for those. It's just that when you don't have enough of that, then you need to cover the gap with faith. All right, so in this side of the extreme, there is no room for reason at all. That, in fact, Søren Kierkegaard said something to the effect that I believe because it's absurd. He borrowed that from way back, I think it was Tertullian who said that. So the very warrant for religion is that it's an absurd thing to believe. Whereas Blaise Pascal's side says, no, you use reason all the time. It's just that for those things that don't quite get you there, that's when you have to plug in faith. Now, Wittgenstein has a very special kind of Fideism. It's not really on the spectrum anywhere, because what he said was that there are different language games going on, and that one can't really criticize the other. So by language game, I mean something like this. If I go to a doctor and I meet the doctor might say, hey, Carlos, how you doing? And then later on we go to his office, we sit down, and he says, so hey, Carlos, how are you doing? Right? So now, he just played two different language games there. Right? The first language game is a language game of greeting, of just sort of getting the first thing of the day, and so on. Whereas the second one was the language game of diagnostics. It's a very different kind of language game that he's playing. So Wittgenstein's position was that the faith community has a language game, and that the scientific community has a language game. And because of their different language games, it just makes no sense for one to criticize the other. Okay, so that's why it's Fideism, because there's no way that a scientist can meaningfully attack or criticize the faith community. All right, so faith stands alone in its own circle as producing the truths and knowledge that are part of that language game. All right. Now, the reason I thought that we would start today with talking about Fideism is because Fideism is exactly the opposite of skepticism, right? I mean, if you think about this spectrum, skepticism would be somewhere around here. You'd reject that altogether, because you'd say, a skeptic probably would say, there is no function for faith in the support of knowledge claims. Right? So let me give you some examples of Fideism. The most common, of course, are religious claims. Anytime that you have a claim that's religious in nature, it ends up being, well, yeah, you just have to accept it by faith. I've had the discussion with my sister. She's an evangelical Christian. We had a long discussion about evidence and so on. And at some point she goes, you know what, you're just missing the point. It's not about evidence, it's about faith. But there are other things that are like Fideism that are different. There's a similar cases. First of them is political. Maybe my colleague, Dr. Fagan, will talk about political skepticism and so on. An example that I can think about in, I think it was 2004, there was an article by Ron Susskind that came out that called the person who wrote it, talked about how President Bush at the time was so sure that our actions in Iraq were good and moral and all that. When he was asked, how do you know? Senator Biden at the time asked him, how do you know? And he said, well, just trust me. I know it by instinct or something to that effect. So when you disregard the call for reasons and just say, vote for me because I'm telling you to, or because I'm your boss, or because you should support your party, that would be a way of pushing away real reasons for it. Discipline the child. Is my son Zach right here? So I know everybody who's had a child has had to come down to the fideist argument at some point. Because I said so. There's no, at that point, there's no arguing, right? Love. This is an interesting one too. Sometimes you think about love as something as being outside the realm of reason, right? So you hear the very, devastating, unfortunate situations where you have somebody, in an abusive situation, and they say, "Oh, but I love him. I can't leave him because I love him," as if love was something that was outside the realm of rational discourse, right? Last but not least, the question of Santa. Again, I kind of struggled about it. How do we do it?
Wait, Santa's not real?
You ask questions.
Not a good time.
How do you know? How is it possible that he puts all these gifts, every gift in the world, in this thing? Yeah, well, just believe. It's okay. Just be good. And you wonder whether these are, especially this last one, whether it's a kind of a harmless form of fideism. And at first, I believe, yeah, it probably is kind of harmless. Then I don't know. I kind of changed my mind about that and thought that if we do that early in life, maybe we're setting it up for that possibility that there's always a point where you can just stop asking questions and take things on faith. So I'm not sure if I had to do it again that I tell him something. Although he figured it out pretty good.
But
all right.
Philosophers of father didn't really help.
All right, so skepticism. I want to talk briefly about the origin of skepticism because it's different. It's very different from what you guys do here. Now, it's good reasons why it was generated from this point of view, but it is different. Classical philosophical skepticism basically asserts nothing. Okay, the idea of classical skepticism is that the very attempt to try to put together these scaffolding for how to generate knowledge is what keeps you from being able to live a good life. The term atalaxia is a term that means it's kind of a lack of turmoil in your life. And basically Greek philosophy at the time was dedicated to finding how to reach atalaxia, what is the good life like. And so all these other schools at the time, the Stoics, the Epicureans, the Platonists, and so on, all of them had these scaffolding of ways of generating truths and knowledge, and this is good and this is bad. And what the skeptics said is, no, you're wasting your time with all of that. You just have to sort of, for every good experience, or for every experience, you can come up with a counter experience. So all you have to do is sort of have this calmness of mind. And if with that calmness of mind you reach knowledge, then maybe you get there. But you're certainly not going to get there with these constructions. Now notice that scientific skepticism is not like that. Because you do take science as the arbiter for what you should accept as real, what you should accept as true. Okay, so there is that difference, although the starting point is one of suspending your belief and sort of saying, okay, I'm not going to accept it just because. I'm going to accept it only after I've had an opportunity to see the evidence, to hear you talk, to see the pictures and so on. Okay. All right. So why should a skeptic know about the fideist argument? Well, because they're so different. I think that a proper understanding of skepticism should require a proper understanding of fideism as well, and what fideism presents to you as a problem. Okay, and the biggest problem here is that the kind of argument that a skeptic can proffer in response to a fideist is one that a fideist would not accept. So philosophically, we have a really kind of dicey problem here. All right. So yes.
Does this at all apply when the religious argumenters start to go into the science realm? So like Christian Science.
No.
So this is purely more of the philosophical religious, like God exists because I believe it.
Right.
God exists because there's evidence for Noah's flood.
Yeah, exactly. No, and I must say, if I were to, I toyed about putting one more slide to say what skepticism or what fideism isn't. And one of the things that fideism, or that's not fideism, is something like, say, intelligent design. That's not fideism because it's attempting, through terrible science and all that, but it's attempting to show some evidence for why you should believe X. And and even natural theology is not a version of fideism, because natural theology or rational theology is precisely the attempt to put reason into theological claims, right? So no, these are not those cases. The cases I'm talking about are the ones when the person says you're missing the point if you're trying to use reasoning. Because the whole point of accepting theological statements is that they have to be accepted by faith, right? So now, I'm going to break every rule. Yeah?
Just quickly, where does the literal interpretation of Scripture fit in that? Is that closer to Judaism?
Wow. It might be, because at that point what you're saying is, no, I don't have to give you reasons why that interpretation should be accepted. Or you give some sort of a begging the question, well, it says so in the Bible that you should accept it. So, it's like a self-licking icicle, right? So no, I think that would be more of, anytime the conversation ceases, right, then I think you have a version of fideism, right? Okay, like I said, I'm going to break every rule of PowerPoint because you can't read that very clearly. So what I'm going to read it to you, because this, better than any other quote, explains what the problem is, right? Okay. Though philosophy is carried on as a coercive activity, the penalty philosophers wield is, after all, rather weak. If the other person is willing to bear the label of irrational or having the worst argument, he can skip away happily maintaining his previous beliefs. He will be trailed, of course, by the philosopher furiously hurling philosophical implications. What do you mean you're willing to be irrational? You shouldn't be irrational because... And though the philosopher is embarrassed by his inability to complete this sentence in a non-circular fashion, he can only produce reasons for accepting reasons, still he's unwilling to let his adversary go. Wouldn't it be better if philosophical arguments left the person no possible answer at all, reducing him to impotent silence? Even then, he might still sit there silently, Buddha-like. Perhaps philosophers need arguments so powerful they set up reverberations in the brain. If the person refuses to accept the conclusion, he dies. Right? How's that for a powerful argument? Okay, so when I read this, it took me a while to really digest what it's saying. But I think it's an important thing for us skeptics. I'm a skeptic, I'm an atheist, I'm all of those things, but I have to keep this in mind. That I cannot bring reasons, I cannot argue against a fideist unless I'm willing to take an anti-fideist position. Okay, so philosophically, there's very little bite that I can have, right? And so that makes you wonder, all right, so what's next? What do you do about this, right? How can you get out of this problem? Well, philosophically, not much. All right, philosophically, when I try to establish these scaffoldings like the early skeptics were making fun of, I mean, I can see how that each one of the ways you try is problematic. All right. Now, there are some advantages of doing science, of using science as that scaffolding, because of the replication, because of the various ways that science is the one that sort of keeps improving upon itself, and it's a commitment to doubt that science is, rather than a commitment to faith, right? Because you always know that there can be a better explanation to what you've said, and good scientists are willing to drop their explanations to a better one, willingly. So my approach has usually been twofold. On the one hand, I say, look, it's just very convenient for you to say that, oh, just these over here, I'm going to say, don't bother me. Nobody can bother me. It's all about faith. It's convenient. You wonder, can't help but wonder what it is about it that creates it so unique. What's special about those kinds of beliefs that can be just like that, exempt from reasoning, right? But on the other hand, I will have to wonder to what degree the conversation that I'm having is really fruitful, and to what degree is futile. All right. With my sister, it was futile, completely futile after a point. So we just decided not to engage with it anymore. That's just a decision that we made. Yeah, and so that's a case where you wonder to what degree the kinds of conversations that you have moral implications. If they do have moral implications, sometimes I'd rather not drop it. I'd rather have this sort of sense that there's maybe something more than I can do, because maybe somebody's getting harmed at the end. But more often than not these days, I've chosen to just say, you know what, we just have to disagree here. The chaplains at the academy started with this mantra of agreeing to disagree agreeably. Yeah, I'm the faculty advisor for a freethinkers group. I think we have some of the cadets here from the freethinkers group, and so we sort of treading new grounds with that idea of being part of the chaplain's activities and so on. So that's the mantra that's being used a lot. I have about 13 minutes left for questions, so I'm open to whatever you want to talk about. Yeah.
Philosophically, yes, there's probably not much you can do, but psychologically, you can't, because this goes along with cognitive dissonance, confirmation bias, all those types of things that believers will implement. But there are ways. I mean, you can't, pound out, no, you can't believe this way. That doesn't work. That actually makes their belief stronger, and they're less open to reason. But psychologically, there are ways where when you start to begin to break down their identification with the religious beliefs or whatever the belief may be, it's almost like breaking down the barriers between an in-group and out-group. Their self-identity is so drawn from that belief. And so if you can find ways to break it down, arguing with them usually isn't the best way. But if you can find ways to break it down, that opens up a door.
Yeah. Yeah, and I wonder how that's done. I mean, if you have any ideas, I'd like to hear it. There was a recent post, we have a Facebook page for the Yourself Free Thinkers, and a recent quote from Bertrand Russell that said that when you hear something that you disagree with and the person gets angry, it's probably because they know it's false. Because if you know that you have the right view, and somebody disagrees with you, your reaction will probably be more like, oh man, it's too bad you don't understand this. It's more of a feeling of regret that oh, I wish you knew better. But if you know you're wrong, deep down, maybe the answer is to get angry at the other person. So yeah, that whole psychological way of getting into cracking that nut. Wow, that's very interesting.
Oh, look, accountability is one way. You have a lot of beliefs that have broken down once it's exposed, and they're like, okay, people don't think I'm a good person now. So.
Wow. Yeah.
I have a few questions, but a lot of it may hinge on the first. equate skepticism with atheism?
Well, Wittgenstein in particular, the language game thing was in one way central to a lot of the philosophy of language that he had, but it was very criticized as well because it had this lack of the explanation of what exactly constitutes a language game and what doesn't, and so on.
Right, and I'm not as comfortable with that term, but you threw it out there, so
right. Yeah, and in fact, what I took Wittgenstein to do a little bit after he got done talking about language games is that he threw out another term that he called ways of life. And so ways of life are kind of like more overarching idea that some ways of life contain various language games. And so you could interpret what he's saying as that as long as you are in the same way of life, then there is some room for criticism from one to the other. The challenge is for the persons or the people in each of the language games to understand what the language game means.
Well, and I guess that's why I'm asking for clarification. Maybe not so much for what you said, but just we have a philosopher in the room, a doctor of philosophy in the room. Sometimes I feel like I don't have the code book because what skeptic means to me and what skeptic means to someone else. And you pointed out that a little bit about a different classical definition. But skeptic to me does not mean atheist, and then I get in groups that, if they're one and the same, and that's not...
Yeah, and I may have perpetuated that by saying that I'm an atheist and a skeptic. I wouldn't say that they're necessarily together, not necessarily equivalent. I will say that in the various skeptics groups that I have been a part of, the overwhelming majority of the people who were skeptics were also atheists. So there's a correlation, but maybe not a direct cause.
Yeah, right. And so I keep saying, now moving a little bit, when you talk about a category of knowledge / what would I say for saying beliefs, that is, I guess it's this one, exempt from reason. I mean, if the metaphysical exists, could it not be a class of beliefs that is, unfortunately, perhaps exempt from reason, perhaps by definition?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
I mean, because who knows? And I guess that's the problem I have, I guess, is it seems with to be a true skeptic in my sense, is to admit there's a lot of things we don't know.
Right.
And I have a problem because I run into some real fanatical skeptics and that are so sure they know. And that's off-putting to me. That's what I consider a skeptic.
Right. I will answer to at least part of what you said by way of what the Vienna Circle or the positive approach would be. Vienna Circle was a group of philosophers that met between the wars, between World War I and World War II. They're called logical positivists or logical empiricists. And one of the biggest points that they made, they crashed and burned after World War II, but one of the biggest points they made was that sentences don't have real cognitive meaning unless there's a way to verify its content, to verify its truth. And so in that sense, it's not even a matter of being able to do it physically, but just having a concept of what would it be like to say that something's true or false, right? So if I were to say there are active volcanoes in Pluto, that's a meaningful question because even though I don't have the technology today to verify that's true, at least I have a concept of what it would take to verify a statement like that. But the problem with metaphysical statements is that there is no such vehicle for that. And so once you say that, then the positivist position is to say that the sentence is meaningless, that there's nowhere to go from there because there's no first step. And so those would be sort of, again, for the positivists, automatically excluded as just being gibberish. And so that's one way that the skeptic, or some skeptic might say, yeah, I'm willing to disregard those statements that I can't even start to figure out how to accept as true or false.
You said that group crashed and burned. Did that philosophy crash and burn with it, or that way of looking at things?
In a sense, yeah, but what happened with that group is that that group was the last vestige of trying to put together a foundational philosophy. And with the advent of modern philosophy and continental philosophy, that kind of enterprise of trying to create a foundational form of philosophy sort of died away. But the point that they made regarding what is intelligible and what isn't, I think is still valid.
I think that will, all right, yeah, so we have time to say.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.